So this is a staggering problem for people suffering from problematic gambling, that they are constantly being, firstly, reminded of gambling services, and it's tacitly endorsed, it seems, by football. What do you think?
Yeah, you're totally right. And the problem is we're going backwards, not forwards. There are 9 Premier League clubs this season who are going to have a gambling advert on their shirts. That's actually one more than last season. It's not changed since a few seasons ago in 2018-19 when we first did this research. It was the same picture. And what people also need to understand is that gambling-related harms are widespread, and they affect not just the individual, but also their family, their friends. Entire local communities are affected by gambling-related harms. And given the popularity of football, I mean, I'm excited for the season to start, and I'm excited for people to be able to go and watch their teams play, thank goodness, right? But at the same time, we have all these gambling adverts saturating the most popular sport in the world. And what we're saying is it's time for action. Clubs need to do more, and the government have a responsibility as well.
But you do accept that people do have the freedom to gamble if they so choose, and there are responsible ways to do that, to have a flutter, and there are ways to be able to be involved in that industry and to participate in that, and it's a lot of fun for a lot of people. And for a small minority of people, it's very much not fun, and that's where the harm begins. But much like alcohol or anything else that does have a dark side, there's also a light side here too.
Yeah, I don't think at Care we've ever said that there should be no betting at all. We've always recognised that for a lot of people it doesn't cause any problems at all. But when you look at the scale of the problem, YouGov estimate 1.4 million people addicted to gambling in the UK, with millions more said to be at risk, with 55,000 children already addicted to gambling by the time they reach 16 years old. I don't think it's irresponsible, and I don't think it's freedom-hating to say that Premier League clubs and other clubs, football as an industry, has a moral responsibility to examine its relationship with gambling companies. And fascinatingly, Norwich City, the only club in the Premier League with no gambling companies on their shirts or any other kind of relationship, they are trailblazers. Why can't more clubs follow their example for the sake of people who do suffer from really serious and tragic addictions to gambling that in the worst cases can lead to suicide? Do
you think we take gambling seriously enough? As it is often seen as a harmless exercise. You have accumulator bets, even sweepstakes in the office. It's quite normalised. Do you think actually people understand the harm that gambling can cause, not only to individuals but to families and communities?
No, I don't. I think this is part of the problem, and I think the betting industry, which is a multi-billion-pound industry, carefully crafts its advertising to focus on the word fun. So yes, they have their responsible caveats that they throw in, but there's some research really fascinatingly that shows those adverts that highlight fun actually can trigger more gambling, more betting. And in terms of wider public awareness of the dangers associated with gambling, we now know that when children especially are seeing gambling adverts on Twitter, for example, and where they're not aware of the dangers involved, they are far more likely to get hooked at a much younger age. And there's more research suggesting that if you become addicted to gambling when you're a child, a youngster, you're way more likely to have a problem when you're older. And so even the fact that gambling-related harms is a community issue, that's not widely known. I think we tend to think, oh, it just affects individuals, that's their problem to deal with. That's simply not true. It ripples out into across society, and that's why we need to take it more seriously.
Is a blanket ban necessarily the correct answer here, though? Because, of course, there are particular people with particular problems. No one would deny that. But there's also a great deal of good that a lot of gambling companies are doing in terms of putting money in to these gamble-aware campaigns and helping people who are struggling. Do we really think that an absolute blanket ban is the correct way to go here when, for example, looking at things like fast food or alcohol, we take a more targeted approach?
One of the really interesting things with the betting industry is that for a long time there's been a voluntary expectation, for example, that they will do more to fund treatment for addiction, but also research into gambling-related harms. And time again, each year it turns out that they've not been paying their fair share. And so what that suggests is that you need to be stronger than this voluntary voluntary arrangement. And one of the things the government is doing is they've just reviewed the 2005 Gambling Act. That is long overdue, and thank goodness they have done that. That law was passed in a completely different time. Now it's digital gambling. That's the big thing. And what we've learnt over the past decade and longer is that actually if you want the betting industry to really do what is needed, to start paying up for research for addiction, to start paying up for treatment centres across the country, you need more than this voluntary arrangement. That's why I think a blanket ban is necessary. And very interestingly, Peers for Gambling Reform, a group of 150 peers, released a report earlier this year, I think it was. And what they recommended was you could introduce the ban, but you could delay it until 2023. That would give clubs time to adjust, find new sponsorship. And let's be honest, I think there's going to be plenty of companies out there who want to sponsor popular football teams and make their own money that way. So football clubs have an ethical responsibility to find far better sponsors than gambling firms.
Sorry, just does it stop at football for you, or do you want to see basically no advertising for gambling at all across any sector?
Well, I think it starts with football because of its widespread popularity, and then I think we take an evidence-based approach to looking at everything else and deciding on the basis of the harms that it is causing, is it worth it? Is it worth allowing widespread gambling advertising? I mean, we've seen attempts by broadcasters, for example, around the Euros 2020 to curb the number of betting ads in comparison to the tsunami that we saw in the World Cup 2018. But when we've looked at some of the evidence afterwards, there is evidence suggesting that even during the Euros, there was a spike in the number of people who were placing bets. And all of that can fuel widespread gambling harms, people getting addicted, the need then for treatment. The costs involved with treating people for gambling addiction are enormous. So we need more investment. We need to look at the evidence. It starts with football, and then let's weigh everything else up.
We should say that we did approach the Premier League for a comment this morning, and they haven't responded. But in November 2020, the Premier League Chief Executive Richard Masters said that he believed very strongly that they, so betting companies, activate their partnerships in a responsible way. I mean, what kind of response have you had from the Premier League and clubs on this so far? I mean, do you think that there is willing on their part to, be responsible in how sponsors engage with their teams? And it isn't just gambling, is it? You're right. There is fast food. I mean, TikTok was sponsored where we're on the banners for Euros, which could be equally harmful, not to you, but what do you think? How have they responded to you so far?
Well, I think one of the really interesting things is that by and large we hear the same things again and again from the powers that be, because of course they're making money from the sponsorship deals that they have with these betting firms. But the striking thing for me is that if you look at the betting industry and the revenue that it takes, 60% of its profits come from 5% of people who suffer from gambling addiction. So it's a power imbalance, it's exploitative, and I think that when it comes to the Premier League, there are some examples of positive movement. Everton and Aston Villa, for example, decided to remove gambling sponsors from their shirts. And do you know what happened? Shirt sales for Everton went up 60% after they did that. For Aston Villa, it was 50%. And I think the reason that happened is because fans are beginning to recognise and realise that it's not right for betting firms to be all over their team shirts. They want their teams to make responsible decisions. So the more teams that go down this route, and crucially, it's not just about betting logos on shirts. 19 out of 20 Premier League teams have some kind of relationship with betting companies. So you've got to start with the big clubs in the Premier League, the top 5, top 6, top 10 even. They've got to set the example, and then other clubs will follow.
Now, that 5% figure of people who have a real harm and a harmful relationship with gambling and plough so much money into it, that implies there are 95% of people who don't. And at what point does this conversation become too restrictive for those who do think that actually having a flutter now and again is an all right thing to do, that this is a legitimate industry and not one that we should be strangling, and actually in many ways is an incredibly regulated industry in this country compared to many others?
Well, I mean, I think that actually if you look at the 2005 legislation, for for example, that largely isn't something that imposes tremendous burdens upon the betting industry. That's why we're having a review of the 2005 legislation. It's about time that was updated. It's an analogue law in a digital age. It doesn't work any longer. So I think there is scope for more regulation to be used for the benefit of that 5%. I mean, that's the point, isn't it? 60% of the money coming from that 5%. Of course it does, because it's in the betting industry's interest to target those who keep giving more. And so I think when it comes to where do we draw the line, that's why we need wider debate. That's why when the government publishes its response to the review itself, or the actual review, it should be debated within the House of Parliament. There should be proper scrutiny. It should go out to stakeholders again. The betting industry will have its opportunity to make its representations, but so will groups like CARE and many others as well. And do you know something? I've seen over the last few years I've been involved in this work, growing public awareness about the risks of gambling-related harms and a growing public appetite, particularly when you look at polling, widespread desire among men and women for more action to be taken. So I think the public expect the government to come off the back of this review and be insistent that there are changes that are coming. Let's bring the betting industry in line.
James, just before we let you go, if someone does suspect that they have a problematic relationship with gambling, what advice and support is there for them available?
It's a great charity, GamCare. That would be the first port of call if I was them. They've got a helpline that you can ring. You can go onto their website as well. There are a number of other similar charities. Please, if that is you, just head to GamCare, speak to professionals who can help you and set you on the road to recovery.
Excellent stuff. Thank you. James Mildred from CARE there. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
Welcome to the GB News YouTube channel. You can watch us live 24 hours a day, catch up on your favourite shows and join in the conversation in the comments below.
Don't forget to subscribe and you'll never miss any of our exclusive content.